All right, we're recording. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special edition of Undeniably Raw. John with you here tonight. And we're going to do this more and more frequently where we have inspirational, motivational people around the sphere of athletics, fitness, and active lifestyle. You guys might have been able to check out the episodes we had with Candler Cook, who is the 145-pound high school senior turned UGA defensive lineman. He was on talking about his book, From Underdog to Bulldog, My Journey as a College Football Walk-On. Then we had Nick Gentile a few weeks later, who responded to a Craigslist ad to become the general manager at Crunch Fitness in Athens, Georgia. And he ended up overseeing 13 locations and counting of Crunch Fitness through Fitness Ventures LLC. So we love having all these inspiring people on our show with us that have, a life centered around athletics, fitness, and active lifestyle. And today we're very honored to have with us Wes Blankenship, who was so kind to come on with us today. Wes has done a lot of sports broadcasting in Georgia. He has worked for WMAZ in Macon. He also worked for 11 Alive. It's kind of how I got introduced to him personally. I saw him on the Atlanta News. And now he's doing some more personal ventures, but also is doing a podcast with DJ Shockley called the Shock and Shit Podcast on GeorgiaDogs.com. So, Wes, thank you so much for joining us, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, Huff. Appreciate the few minutes you're donating to me tonight. I look forward to a good conversation, my man.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine and all the viewers. I wanted to we've done this with the past couple of guests we've had. I just want to kind of get a little background about how you grew up. What made you want to become a sports broadcaster?
Yeah, so I grew up in Lawrenceville, Georgia. I was born in Savannah, but my family moved from there when I was 5 years old. So I feel proud of the fact that I was born down there in a historic city that's important to Georgia's history, but kind of grew up more, a little bit closer to Atlanta. But, as anyone from the suburbs knows, you don't tell people you're from Atlanta because that would be disingenuous. So I'm not from Atlanta. I grew up about 45 minutes away. I grew up in Lawrenceville, went to Collins Hill High School, grew up in Gwinnett County, and it has really grown up really with alongside my lifetime. You talk about moving there in the mid 90s and just watching that community grow to what it is now. The biggest, I believe, still the biggest suburb, some of the biggest schools and the largest school system, at least if it isn't still the biggest, it's up there with the biggest in the country. So you talk about a place that was once very rural and very kind of the middle of nowhere. Lawrenceville, Georgia is now, the heart of suburban America in a way. So it's kind of surreal, kind of cool to know people and know friends whose families grew up in that place that was just so different from the place I grew up in. And it's been great to, as you mentioned, work in Macon and work in Atlanta and go to the University of Georgia. So I've got a very well-rounded life of living in different places around the state. And I love Georgia. I'm a Georgia boy through and through. I feel very proud of my life taking place in so many different parts of the state, and just excited to as they say, hunker down as long as I'm allowed to live here and as long as my life keeps me here.
Absolutely. So you were around some pretty good football being in Gwinnett County, and even when you were covering stuff in Macon and everything. Did you play sports yourself in high school?
Yeah, so that's a huge part of, not the only part, but a huge part of why I went into the field that I did. Growing up, being a 5-10-year-old kid, maybe five's a little bit too early, but being a 10-year-old kid growing up and watching Sports Center as I ate my cereal before school and watching Stuart Scott and Dan Patrick, and seeing Scott Van Pelt on Sports Center in the mornings. A lot of my friends may have been watching Saved by the Bell, but I was, keeping up with the stats on Allen Iverson and a young quarterback at the time by the name of Tom Brady. And, it's things like that that kind of shaped my interest in that career path. And was always a strong writer. My mom was a fifth grade teacher and is a writing specialist now, semi-retired, but just kind of inherited that gene of wanting to be a good writer and also loving sports, reading the newspaper, every Saturday edition that would preview the Georgia game that day in the Gwinnett Daily Post, and then reading the recap the next day on the way to church of whatever had happened, and of course listening to Larry Munson call the games. I was immersed, right? I was watching sports on TV. I was reading about sports. I was listening to sports on the radio. So not only did I love the team, and that that's how I was taking in that information about the Dogs and about the Braves and about the Falcons and Michael Vick. I found that that I'm interested in maybe doing this as a career. There are people that are writing these stories. There are people that are going and talking to David and Matt Stinchcomb for a few minutes every day. That's a job that I can have. Like, when that dawned on me, I think I kind of determined early on in my life that that's what I wanted to do. And when I made it to high school, there were a few years that I really wanted to play football, starting around the age of 10. And I had a condition called pseudotumor cerebri. And that sounds like a very scary thing, but really what it is my optic nerves were swollen. And the ironic thing about this condition is it typically affects middle-aged women. And I was very surprised to hear that this was something going on with me. So I had to take some medication for a while. Made me, lose a ton of weight. I was kind of a pudgy kid around the age of 10 and kind of thinned out a bit through my middle school years, but I was not allowed to play contact sports because I had to keep having these checkups and do these eye exercises and look at all kinds of stuff. And doctors were monitoring my brain, in different sorts of ways. I have a spinal tap around the age of, I think I was 10 when I had that. And, because of that, I was not allowed to play contact sports. And when you're watching Georgia play football in the early 2000s and you see Thomas Davis and Greg Blue just destroying people when they wanted to, at will, I wanted to do that. I wanted to play that sport, but I wasn't allowed to. And I wasn't developing those skills alongside my friends that were playing, Little League football and playing through middle school and stuff. So it was kind of a tough dichotomy there. And I wanted to play. And I told my mom one day, it was 8th grade. I remember this. There were some signups going into high school where if you wanted to play football, you had to sign up for the weight training program in 8th grade. And they would send people, I guess, over to the middle school and say, hey, if you want to do freshman football, you're going to have to get on this weight program. And they did that through the PE classes and stuff. And I told my mom, like, Mom, can we get a checkup? Like, I've lost weight. I don't have headaches anymore. They say that this condition is like gone away. Can I get tested again? And like, can a doctor tell me that I'm allowed to play football? And she was a little hesitant about it, but she said yes. And I got cleared to play. And I got, the doctor said I could do it and I could do the weightlifting and all that stuff. So I was a little bit behind schedule for playing with, all my buddies or whatnot. But I was super excited to get to do it. And got to play, my freshman year. I was super, like, I was incredibly thin. I couldn't put any kind of weight on. Was a big learning curve. Imagine not playing football at all and then trying to play with a bunch of people that it was like instinctual to because they were learning it in Georgia practices and stuff all their life. I started to really feel like I was coming into my own my sophomore year as on JV, put some good muscle weight on. I never, and this isn't like a fish story that gets better through the years. Like I played tight end and defensive end, and I never ever dropped a pass in practice. It never went through my hands, never let it hit the turf. But the problem was we were like a very power run football team. So as a tight end, they weren't throwing the ball to anybody really. And I
Right.
was a little bit of a tweener, physically. Like I didn't quite have the 40 time to be a wide receiver, and I
Mhm.
didn't, I wasn't quite putting up the bench press reps to be more of a lineman, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or a defensive end. So because of that, I kind of got stuck at tight end, but I was smart. Like I knew the plays. I studied them and, looked at the cards at the time. I had somewhat of a photographic memory. That skill has long departed me. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's 4.5 years in Athens, Georgia will do that to you.
Right.
But at the time, man, I knew the plays, and I tried as hard as I could, and it was rough. I mean, it was ugly. I bet I could go back and look at some of those practices and look at myself back then, and I would turn the tape off because it's pretty rough to watch. So all this to say, my spring practice of my sophomore year. Okay, so this is the spring leading into my junior year as a football player, going into varsity. Spring game, I have at the defensive end position 2 sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. So by the end of that spring, I don't know, I wasn't like going to be a starter or anything, but it was starting to become like probably kind of difficult for me to not get some reps on varsity, right? So I was feeling pretty confident. I was feeling really like I've put some hard work in. Football is like might actually be something that I can do uh, and succeed at. And going into my junior year, like actual junior fall, I started to develop these migraines after every practice, and I had them my freshman year a few times and through my sophomore year a few times, and it got a little bit worse each year. But I kind of just chalked it up to this is what football's like. I into practice and I can't see for a few minutes. Like that's normal, right? Like it's hot. That's what happens. Um, and I started to notice like even when I wasn't playing, even when I wasn't at practice, if I'd stand up too quickly, I would black out. Like I couldn't see and I'd get really disoriented. And I told my mom about it, and she, having remembered obviously my years of head issues growing up, just thought maybe we should go get that checked out. So we went to another head doctor just to like rule some things out, and he told me that I was having what was called concussive migraines. So I wasn't necessarily getting like full on concussions. I'm sure I had a few at practice or in some JV games or whatever, but I was having repeated trauma uh, to my head. And he said, Wes, this can add up. This can be really dangerous. This is, I guess, 2006. So this is before the NFL's research into CTE, or I guess at that time, the third party research into CTE, because the NFL didn't really want anything to do with that at the time. But this was before anyone really knew much about that. And if they did know about it, it wasn't public knowledge. It wasn't a story. It wasn't, out in public consumption like it is now. So I go from not being able to play football at all growing up, wanting to play, being absolutely terrible at it as a freshman, starting to be a little bit better at it as a sophomore, and then feeling like I had some good momentum as a junior, and then being told, you know, we're not making you quit, but you need to really think about playing. So I told my mom I'd think about it, but I still really wanted to do it. And I remember going out to practice one day, and I went in for a tackle at the same time as one of my teammates did. I was on, I guess, whatever strong side and he was on the weak side, whatever it happened to be that day. And we combined for a tackle on running back. And Andy, my own, like, I mean, we're all teammates. It was at practice, but Andy, my defensive teammate, got me clean. Like the crown of his head got the side of my temple. And all I saw was stars. And for the rest of that practice, I don't remember but like pieces of it here and there. After that, we went over to the offensive side of practice, and I was running drills, running plays at tight end. You know, it was very simple stuff. You know, you play ball, you know, like the lower the number is, the simpler the play is, right? So it was like 8, 9 ISO, and I was asking our quarterback where to go, you know, and I was like trying to play defensive end later on in practice, and like just continually getting blocked by the starting tight end on varsity at the time because I hadn't quite climbed the depth chart that much. And he was just going after me like, dude, what are you doing? Like you're not even here. You're not even coherent. So they called the trainer over, and at that point she took me up and like ran some concussion tests on me, and that ended up being my last varsity day in pads ever. And it's really tough as a football player to, you know, inevitably have that day where it's your last day, right? And no one can choose when that day is. If you can choose that day, if you're Drew Brees, if you're Phillip Rivers, you know, you're very blessed. But most people don't get to pick when that day is, because most people want to keep playing as long as they can. And that was it. And that was it for me, playing. And it was tough, you know, like I said, not knowing about CTE and not knowing the risk long term that could actually have, because, you know, even still today, right? I think there's so much awareness of, you know, head trauma and safety and all that kind of thing. But even today, there's still a little bit of that mentality of like, if I sit out for a concussion, like this doesn't feel like a real injury, you know, like I can still walk, I can still use my arms, I can still catch, you know, why can't I play? And I think that at that point, certainly the mentality was, whatever, you got your bell rung, get back in there, you know? So it was hard. It was very difficult to have to make a decision. I went to another doctor's appointment after that and talked to my parents, and, you know, it was hard, man. There was a lot of tears shed. There's a lot of very tough conversations around that, because that was just something I wanted to do. I didn't necessarily think I was going to play in college or anything. I didn't have any delusions of grandeur to that level, but I felt like I could at least have fun playing high school football. And here I am, you know, having to hang it up as a junior. And I talked to my head coach, Larry Sherrill at Collins Hill, and he said, you know, we want you to be on the team in any way possible, you know, whether it's a trainer or whatever it is, you know, we want you to be here. And I wanted to be there, but maybe it was the pride, you know, it would have been a tough pill to swallow for me to be taping my buddy's ankles. You know, there's just something about that didn't really appeal to me. But I saw the video staff that was like really struggling to like film practices and film games and like help out with the communication on the sidelines for the coaches. I said, Coach, I don't know if I want to be a trainer. I think y'all have that under control. This is like the largest school in the state. I think y'all have enough trainers, but I do want to be a part of this team. Like I can't imagine a life where I just go home after school and I'm not out here. And so I said, can I help with the video staff with putting video together of practice? And he said, sure. So I got you know, guidance, a little bit of help from the staff that had been doing that. And at that time, it was one coach. It was one of the freshman assistant coaches that was helping varsity out. So you know how that goes too in high school football. If you're an assistant freshman coach, you're pretty low on the totem pole. But this guy was, you know, he knew how things worked. He knew how the cameras worked. He knew how the tape decks worked and knew the system to put everything in. And how to like mark up the tape and mark up, defensive segments from offensive segments and whatnot. So he helped me out with that. And then we ended up getting this camera system that was like ahead of its time. And all it was like a remote control, like you remote control a car, like you get a remote control car for Christmas. You've got the joystick that points the car forward and backwards, and you've got the joystick that goes right to left. Well, some genius engineered a camera system to basically make a camera do the same thing. The reverse and forward for the car was zooming in and out on the camera. You like put a camera inside of a box. It's wild. It sounds so primitive now because I know how advanced everything is. And then the right to left moves the camera right to left. So I do that for the practices. I would do that for the games. And then during the game, I'd set up all the camera stuff early, super early. And then during the game, I got to like wear a headset and like be that assistant student coach or whatever that helps the coaches call the plays in for the game. So I felt involved. I felt involved with the team and still felt like I was part of the program. But I think that opened up my eyes to like a technical, like more of a technical side of like using a camera, using editing equipment. And I combined that with my love of football and my love of sports and my love of media and journalism that I talked about earlier. And that sent me on this trajectory of going into the University of Georgia, basically dead set on wanting to be in media, wanting to be in broadcast, wanting to take photos, take videos, what have you. I worked for the student newspaper for a few years as a photographer, chief photographer, ended up doing some video work for the Red and Black, went through the Grady College of Journalism, and ended up getting a internship at 11 Alive before I graduated. So that kind of rounded out my newspaper background with some TV stuff as well. Even though I didn't like go through the TV program, my whole journey of sports and media consumption and reading and listening to entertaining voices like Larry Munson, staying up and watching, interviewers like David Letterman, like I was consuming it all growing up. And that kind of formed my core of what I wanted to do, the kind of work I wanted to create, the kind of ways I wanted to entertain people. And luckily that led to my first job at 13 WMAZ as a photographer doing video work, and then eventually as a sports anchor, which led to 11 Alive. So that's kind of how my professional career shaped itself up. And that's where now, if you've watched any of my Coffee Town videos, I think that a part of that is just like this unfinished idea of me being a part of high school football and just wanting to pay tribute to some of the people that I played ball with and the coaches I played for and the teams I covered after I played at when I was at WMAZ in Macon and covering Warner Robins teams in Macon, Washington County, some really legendary teams in the state, and doing the same thing at 11 Alive and covering teams in Atlanta and the surrounding areas. So that broadcast, local news era of my professional life, is over. That industry is just, I feel like it's really struggling. I'm very happy with where I am now and getting to host a podcast with DJ for Georgia Dogs and having a 9-to-5 right now that's a little less demanding. We've got a 1-year-old. My wife and I had a little girl a week and a month before that fateful March 11th COVID date where everything really shut down in the U.S. So it's been a much calmer year professionally because I'm not working, these crazy nighttime hours and still able to help out Georgia Dogs and host that show with Shock and have some pretty fun conversations. So yeah, man, that's where I am. That's what led me here. And that was probably a much too long of an answer to the question you asked, but that's what went into it.
No, that's exactly what I was hoping to hear, kind of, where you got your passion to football from. It's interesting that you actually knew before you even graduated high school, it sounds like, what you wanted to major in, and stuck with it all the way through college. I feel like that's so rare nowadays. Like, people are still feeling themselves, feeling their career paths out well into college. They end up changing majors, end up taking 6 or 7 years to get their undergrad now, and then changing jobs a lot once they graduate. It seems like you actually had from that fateful day,
Mm.
in high school, it sounds like you pretty much had a straightforward path. Now, of course, I'm sure there was plenty of adversity here and there along the way between
Yeah.
stops at different places. But it's interesting that you never really deviated. I mean, how many people can say that, everybody has an idea of what they want to do when they're in like second grade. They want to be an astronaut or whatever. And then that all changes 15 times by the time you finish high school. It sounds like you, by the time you were 16 or 17 years old, knew exactly what you wanted to do and made that happen, and are still doing it really today.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like, I'm big into, and I've gotten more into it because my wife is much more type A than I am, but I've gotten much more into like setting goals um, at the start of each year, and whether it's the goals for the year or your 5-year goals, or where you want to be in 10 years, right? I think there's a lot of power in that, and I think it's just always a good thing to set your course. And I found that, as when you set those goals and you look back on them, you almost, like, I'd say 95% of the goals I set, I think, man, I should have been a little bit more ambitious, because I achieved that goal 2 years, 3 years before I wanted to. And that's, without knowing it or without thinking about it, that's how I always grew up, thinking about what I wanted to do. And I think when you have that much of a laser focus of what you want your life to look like, maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or maybe it fuels you to do what you want to do. I think that's part of what's carried me here. And I'm not naive to think that it's just on a silver platter and it's easy. I mean, there's a lot of hard work that went into it. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into it socially. Certainly in college, I mean, I had a fun social life, but a lot of my buddies, when you're working at a newspaper and you're a photographer, yeah, like 12-year-old me would be super excited to think, yeah, I'm on the sidelines and I'm taking photos of AJ Green, and I'm getting to travel and go to games and, see Todd Gurley his freshman year, and see him run all over the SEC with Keith Marshall, right? But then the other side of that you don't think about when you're 12 years old is, well, 20-year-old me has friends that are tailgating before those games, and they're having fun, and they're having fun after the games. And, I've got to go edit pictures after the games. So there's a sacrifice that you make, I think, when you are that focused on what you want to be. But without those sacrifices, like, you can't have it both ways. You can't have both of them, right? You can't have both of those things at the same time. You can have both of them in your life, but you can't have them at the same time. There was one year where I said, I'm taking this year off. I want to live as a normal college student going to football games. And I'm so glad I did. It was the 2011 season. I was a junior, and I didn't miss a game in the stands. I didn't work a Saturday, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And I'm grateful that I, at the time, had enough wisdom rattling around somewhere in my mind to do that. But it just taught me, like, I can't have this much fun and also, be focused on this goal that I have, this career aspiration. I think for me, it was bigger than a career aspiration. It's like, what do I want my life to be? And I don't say that because, like, I've made broadcast or I've made sports media my life. I just mean, what do I want my life's craft to be outside of being a husband, outside of raising a family? God has made us here to work. That's what we have to do. What am I going to spend my hours working on? And that's what I always kind of focused on, was knowing that I wanted to create things. I knew I wanted to have fun doing them, and I wanted to make people laugh. I wanted to make people feel things. I wanted to entertain people as I did them. So that's what's guided me through these, crazy career ups and downs, and football ups and downs, and concussions, and everything. That's what I wanted to do, and I knew it.
I hear you. And, I was watching another podcast the other day, and the guy was talking about, as humans, we're not necessarily designed just to, like, we have this idea that we always want to be happy, but sometimes we'll sacrifice our own happiness for a sort of fulfillment. And so that's kind of the way it was for me too. I had to make a lot of sacrifices. I walked on the football team at Georgia, which was quite a tall task for me. I was not a very talented guy, so I had to work, 15 times harder than anybody. And it already is a very, difficult task for people who had the talent. And so, I had a lot of sacrifice, spent a lot of hours in weight rooms and on the track and everywhere else, training. And, and there's a lot of times when I missed out on stuff too that I would have liked to have been a part of, but it was all about the bigger picture. What made me, what did I want my whole body of work to look like? I had to sacrifice some of those days and moments of immediate happiness and bliss. It's more about a deeper fulfillment that you're seeking. And I feel like seems like you've found that pretty well in your life with what you do. And as far as making people laugh, I know you are really popular on Twitter, especially with your impressions. I'm kind of curious how that all got started. How I've heard you do a Larry Munson one. I've heard you do Matt McConaughey pretty well. When did you start doing those impressions?
The first impression I ever did was a Larry Munson impression, and I was 12 years old. And, Munson had such an iconic voice, and I spent enough time listening to it. I just wanted to see if I could sound like him. It was just like a joke. And he would always say before every play, at that time, because no one was running the spread offense, Georgia certainly wasn't, he'd say, "We're in an eye." He's like, he's setting up the play, like this is the formation they're in. And once I learned how to say that, you can sound like that, I was like, I can say anything that sounds like that. And it's funny that you asked me that, because I thought about that recently. Like, what was the first impression I did? Why did I want to do it? And it was Larry Munson, because that's what I grew up hearing, and I wanted to emulate it, and I wanted to sound like him. I thought it was funny, but I also, part of me wanted to do what he did. So that started that. And then my little brother and I, we would always just goof off. I don't know if you remember a show called Mystery Science Theater. Things. I forget what the number is. Is it 3000?
I don't remember.
Mystery Science Theater. Anyway, yeah, 3000. We'd watch this show, and it's like these characters, they watch these stupid old sci-fi movies, but they do these goofy character voices over it and basically make fun of the movie while they're watching. Mm-hmm. So my brother and I about this show, and we just loved it. And that basically opened up this box of this goofy humor of doing weird voices, making fun of each other, and doing impressions and making fun of one another, and trying to sound like each other and making fun of what the other person said. That's the stupid stuff you do when you have a brother. And I think then I just I don't know, I was always the guy that could imitate somebody in the locker room. If they had a quirk, or if a coach said something stupid, I would be the guy that, obviously would not get caught doing this in front of the coach, but I'd repeat what the coach had said and just crack people up. And I did that. I do that at work. But the thing is about working in local news, I wanted to do it. I wanted to do segments like I'm doing now in Coffeetown, and the McConaughey stuff, and impersonating Mike Leach. I wanted to do that kind of thing and make segments like that at work. In Atlanta, I wasn't really comfortable enough to do it in Macon. I was still trying to figure out how to be on TV and not knock my knees together out of nervousness. But I wanted to think outside the box like that. But those types of ideas, they don't really fly necessarily in local news. They want to be, they say they want to be a little bit outside the box, but when it comes down to it, they don't want to take risks that are that crazy. And I totally understand that. I totally get that. It's a different kind of industry. It's not stand-up comedy. It's not, you know, crazy media creation hour. Like we have 3 minutes in a broadcast to talk about the sports news of the day. Like you can put some jokes in there, Wes, but you can't be up there like doing impressions of people. So I think once that opportunity ended for me, I realized like, man, people have always told me whenever I do an impression of somebody, like, man, you're good at impressions, but I never thought about it, you know, and that's not something I want to like build my career upon or anything, but I just think it's a fun skill to have, especially the past year that we've had, like the Coffee Town videos that I've made. You know, if I noticed that people responded positively to the content I was putting on Twitter, like screw talking about politics when everyone else is, or COVID when everyone else is already like thinking about it 9 of the 10 hours that they're awake or whatever, or however long they're awake. Not the best at math. That's why I went into journalism. I'm going to talk about funny stuff. I'm going to do funny videos. I'm going to do Coffee Town videos. I'm going to do impersonations until people are sick of it, I guess. And that's what I did. And I'm not saying I'm going to like continue to do that down the road. There are a lot of people that have their entire Twitter persona is that, and that's certainly not me. But I just like to think of myself as somebody that can entertain people when the moment is right. And if I have a personal experience or a voice to lend or a story to tell that can make people feel that way, then I'm going to try to do it.
Isn't that what's great about the internet, though? I mean, the fact that I'm doing this right now, I didn't have to ask for anybody's permission. I just had to get you to agree to come on this podcast, and we talk about whatever we want to talk about, and we do whatever we want to do. And so it's pretty got to be a pretty freeing feeling to have that autonomy to do impressions and do things like that. You don't have to ask anybody if that's okay.
Yeah.
You just do it, and everybody gets to enjoy it. So that's what's kind of the beautiful thing about the internet. You don't have to ask permission.
Yeah.
But yeah, to that point though, I saw you've been doing some work. Are you still doing the Tackler Media stuff? Is that something you're still working on?
So the story with Tackler is myself, Jason Butt, and John Michaels were all out of work this spring. Jason Butt was a writer for The Athletic, and for the AJC and for UGAsports.com. John Michaels was with 92.9 The Game in Atlanta, and I was, previously of 11 Alive in Atlanta. So we had a pretty good followership of overlapping fans, but also fans that didn't overlap. John was known as like the Falcons guy. Jason was known as kind of like a UGA Falcons hybrid. I was a Braves, Falcons, Georgia social media guy. And once John and Jason got laid off, we kind of started talking to one another about doing like a startup. And you have to remember at the time, late May, early June, this was like apocalyptic sports zone. Like we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what college football was going to be like. We didn't know the NFL was going to do. Baseball was like tinkering around with the cutout fans in the stands and that kind of thing. So it was a very like bleak moment for sports in the middle of this pandemic. But we knew that we still had things to offer. We knew about this newsletter model that was, popular for people that were popular for journalists that were out of work. And we decided to try to start it up. And luckily for Jason and luckily for John, within like a month to 2 months of us starting that up, Jason, just the way the timing worked out, got like a mostly full-time offer with the AJC and with UGA Sports. He couldn't turn those down. He's getting paid. We were trying to figure out ad revenue for Tackler Media as a startup. And then John ended up getting a full-time offer with 680. I ended up getting my full-time offer with a company called Pitch Maps, which does messaging consulting for business sales. So if you're in the market for that, go to pitchmaps.com. That's a shameless plug right there.
There you go.
But we were all blessed to actually find full-time work. John has kids. I have a child. Jason's married, and it didn't work out. I mean, I can't say, I can't like sugarcoat it. Like that idea did not materialize the way that we set out for it to, but we also didn't expect to all get jobs within 4 to 5, 6 months of it happening. So once it stopped, once we stopped being able to create that work, um, I'm grateful for people that believe in our careers and followed the account and signed up for the emails and everything. We just weren't able to do it. And I created a post. I basically said like, hey, I've got a full-time job. John and Jason do too. We're going to still have the spirit of what this site was. And, I gave the password and gave the login to people that are, laid off or want to get their chops, covering sports or writing about sports. And they just want to have a platform to put those thoughts down. And that is still there for people. There's a podcast that still shares articles on it. We still have a couple writers doing previews of college games and NFL games, but Jason, John, and I are very much not involved because our full-time jobs, take up most of that time. But I'm grateful for the experience, because right now people are still, using that platform to kind of get their feet wet and feel like they've got an opportunity and a place to get their sports thoughts down. That can be a scary place to be, of wanting to be in this industry and not having anywhere to get those thoughts published. So I'm grateful that people are still using that resource. But B, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm glad that I have now learned what it takes to get an idea like that off the ground. It takes teamwork. It takes a lot of commitment. And it takes really a spirit and a mindset that nothing will deter you. And I don't think we had that, because we were all, by no fault of anyone's, we were all looking for other full-time work at the time. I mean, it was a scary place to be for a sports reporter, sports media person in the middle of a pandemic when sports are shut down and layoffs are happening. It was either stupid or really bold to try it. I think it was bold, because I think we went about it the best way that we could. But yeah, a lot of lessons learned in that time, and I'm glad that we did it, and I'm glad that we're all working now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to hear that too. And I'm really, I think that's really great that you left that platform there for people to use. I mean, that's very generous of y'all to do. And so who knows, maybe somebody will get it to take off. Somebody will be able to fully commit to using that platform. And maybe,
I would love for someone to do that.
yeah, that'd be fantastic. But congratulations on finding your work, and to all the other guys involved in that. Yeah, that's one thing that I mean, this is the first time I've ever talked to you face to face, because we're through Zoom, but still, one thing that I have come to see with you, at least on social media, you're very, here's something that annoys me about some celebrities or media people or whoever. So you're a celebrity in this case. You interact with the common people on Twitter. I cannot stand when people, there's a whole thread of like replies to these blue checks on Twitter. And the only time those comments get acknowledged is if they also have a blue check next to their name.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts, man. I'm
That's
like,
dumb.
looking, it's like you're looking down on just your, if you're not a celebrity, you're not worth their time. And you have a great Twitter following. I mean, you got, last I checked, over 25,000 people that follow you, but it seems like pretty regularly you are interacting with these people and making a very concerted effort to do that. Something I really appreciate about you. And what do you think you attribute that to? Why are you such a personable guy? Where does that come from?
I mean, honestly, dude, the way I've thought about it, and this isn't like why I respond to people that aren't verified, but you know, say you're a celebrity and you have 150,000 followers, okay? 150,000 of those followers aren't verified on Twitter, right? I would
Right.
say that 80, 90% of them are actually not verified. So, I don't like draw my worth out of that number of how many people follow me. Um, but if you do happen to draw your worth and value out of that number, wouldn't it make more sense to interact with the people that actually make up the biggest part of that number? I mean,
Mhm.
why are they there? You know, I thought Twitter was a platform. You know, it's the best feature of Twitter is that you can interact with people that are famous that you would never get to meet in like a hallway somewhere or in the grocery store, you know? So yeah, that's what I think about when I think about that. It's like if someone reached out and commented on something I posted, I don't get to every single one of them. And look, it's a toxic place. I mean, I don't want to acknowledge every single one of them. Some
Mhm.
of them I don't even I mute because it's just not beneficial to me. It's not productive. It's not making my day or life any better. But yeah, man, I view it as like a conversation, a place to converse. And I'll tell you one thing too. I think Twitter is like good for that, but the best thing that could like the best platform that could ever happen. And I want to make it happen. Someone will probably beat me to it because I just don't have the time or resources to just give up and start an app. But I think that if you get in a Twitter argument with somebody, if you've had 3 replies back and forth, okay, and I see this happen in things that I tweet all the time. People argue under something I tweeted, and it just turns into something that is totally off the point of whatever I was saying. If you reply to one another more than 3 times, Twitter should make you open up a video chat and do what we're doing right here. Because I think a lot of people are very bold. I think that they can throw some really hateful things out or really aggressive things out behind a tweet. But if you actually have to take the time and talk to somebody about whatever you're arguing about, whatever your hot take is, I think that's what Twitter should make people do because I think people would actually like connect a little bit better. But obviously, you know, I'm not naive enough to think that that's what Twitter's goal is. Twitter's goal is to make people argue 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and that's what keeps them on the app. So I get that. But I
Mhm.
would love to see some sort of platform where people actually like, okay, we've argued enough in this like back and forth binary argument. Like, let's actually talk to one another.
Mhm.
But I don't know. Maybe one day we'll
Agreed.
see
I like
that.
that idea a lot. I like that idea a lot. You're right. It gets pretty ugly on Twitter, but kudos to you for making it a more positive place. I mean, truly, you do bring a lot of joy to a lot of people every day with all that you do, whether it's having a conversation with people or doing your coffee town stuff. Or I really liked your I really liked the one you did of the. Okay, so Coffee Town, I've come to understand, is kind of a blend of all these different radio announcers you've heard over the years. Kind of it morphed into one Southern voice. And I guess that's kind of where you got the inspiration for the coach during COVID. You know, you were the high school
Yeah.
coach. It was, that man, that was spot on. I shared that to a lot of friends. I was like, this is exactly what our high school coaches sounded like. I was really impressed by that one. But all those things that you do, that is really keeping stuff light. And I think that's what you're saying is really the point of doing that. Is just to give somebody something else to think about and to laugh about and smile about instead of
Yeah.
just bitterness. So I really appreciate that about what you do.
Yeah. I think ultimately, John, before I have to go tonight, this has been a great conversation. But I think the one thing that I wish people going into 2021, I know changing into a new year doesn't like it's not a magic wand. We're not going to just forget what happened in 2020, but I wish there was just a way for us to reappropriate like where we put our resources as people. And we've put a lot of our resources into, you know, defending the ideas that we think about politically, or we've put a lot of our time into these social media platforms when they could be spent, you know, yeah, the separation for COVID is what it is. And people need to be smart about that. But I don't know, man. I wish there could be some sort of great awakening to just meet up with people again and just talk again, because I think that takes away a lot of toxic opinions about people, a lot of toxic thoughts about people, breaks a lot of walls down. But right now, there's just a lot of walls between people. And it's sad, but all we can do is just try to be impactful and influence people to go do something better and be more more impactful and more positive with the people that they actually do see, or the neighborhoods that they live in. That's all I hope for, man. That's like the goal that I have, and hope to lead in the small ways that I can around me. So anyone listening to this, I mean, if you're about that, I encourage you to do it, because I think we'd be a better country. We'd have better communities. We'd have better families, better households for it.
Very well said. All right, I know you got to run. Leave me with this. Georgia's 2021 record in football is?
They're running the table, man. This is the year. This is the time to do it. I'm putting my hat on that hat rack. I'm putting my coat on that coat stand, man. I am owning it. And yes, I went to Georgia. Yes, I host a Georgia podcast. But anyone that knows me knows that I am objective, even though I love the Dogs. I can appraise and appreciate whatever they actually happen to be this season. I thought 2-loss Georgia was what was going to happen this year, and it did. I think they're running the table, and they have to. I mean, with everyone coming back, I know you open up with Clemson. I know the secondary is a concern, but Kirby Smart, the thing about him as a recruiter, not only does he recruit well for the guys that come to him as a freshman and come to play Georgia as a freshman, he doesn't burn bridges with people. So that is why in this new era of transfer portal, not reliance, but transfer portal, like being a big part of your program, that's going to pay dividends for Kirby. I think it's going to help out at the DB position, and he's got a pretty damn good staff. And yeah, man, they just have to do it. You in the SEC, they're the only team right now, only real contender with a quarterback coming back. I mean, if not now, when?
I agree.
That's what I think.
I think so too. I truly do. I think we got all the tools. I think the schedule lines up well. You get past Clemson, especially. Of course, even if you didn't get past Clemson, then that doesn't have any bearing on the SEC championship. You win the SEC with one loss, and you go to the playoff. And I think we can beat Clemson.
There you go.
Anyway, yeah, man, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to talk with you more soon. But get to it, man. I know you're a father and a husband, so I'll let you go be with them. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, John. Have a great week.
You do the same.
See you, bud.